Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is the user's guide for the Sony a7 IV. Now, if you already picked one of these up, what I'm going to do in this video is run through how I would set up this camera to give you some tips and tricks for how I would do it and what to look out for when you are setting it up, what the different settings mean, go through each of the menus, and try to fill you in for how I personally would set it up. Now, it's personal choice how you set it up, so you can try things out and set it the way that you want it, and if that works for you, that's all that really matters. Now, this is going to be a pretty long video because I'm going to start with the very basics. The basics of literally on and off, where the memory cards go, where the battery goes, and we're going to do that in just a second. But before we go too far, thank you very much for watching this. If you do find that this video is helpful, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe because I have a ton of videos that are always being released, like photo news fix and tutorials and tips and tricks. They come out all the time. Plus, there's an archive of 3,000 plus videos from the past 12 years. So let's jump into it right now. First things first, let's start with the on and off switch. I know it's simple, but there's some things I want to tell you about it. You just flick it on, you flick it off to off, but it does not lock in place. So you might want to be careful when you're putting it away in your bag to make sure that it is actually off and didn't get turned on, because the last thing you want to have happen is it take 3,000 pictures in your bag and fill your card, or kill your battery before you ever get to the shoot. Now, speaking of battery, let's flip it over to the bottom. This is where your battery goes. You click that button, it flips the door open. Pop out the battery just like this. This is a Sony Z battery. These batteries are very good. They have a lot of power. They have a lot of juice. They last quite a long time. Now, you'll get more still photos out of a battery charge than if you were just shooting straight video. Video chews up more battery, so just keep that in mind. And of course, a combination of the both will change up how much time you get for the battery charge. I'd always recommend having an extra battery in the bag. It's never a good thing to just have one battery, but what's actually good is in this camera, you can charge the battery in the camera with a USB-C charger, and we'll talk more about that later. But to put it in, it can only go one way. You gotta move this little switch out of the way. I use the battery to do that, and you see how it just slid right in? Now you just put it down there and it clicks right in. When you're shutting the door, I'm like, door, close, door, close, door. Some of the cameras just click in when you do this. Here, you actually have to move this little switch and it locks the door. It engages it so that it's always closed. That's open, you gotta click it again, and there you have it closed. Now, being that this is an interchangeable lens camera, how do you take the lens off and put the lens back on? Well, this is pretty simple. There is a button right here. We got that, Steven? Yep, that is the button. That is your release button for your lens. You press that, nothing's gonna happen until you twist the lens towards you if you're holding it in your right hand, and the lens comes off. Now you see this right here? This is your image sensor. This is the heart of the camera. This is what captures the image. You kind of don't want to sit here and leave it pointed up at the sky like this because you don't want to get dust on it, but for the educational purposes here, I am breaking all of the rules. When you do change lenses, make sure you turn the camera off first, which turns off the power to the sensor so you have less chance of getting dust. I like to turn it down like this and then put the lens back on, just so that you can stop from any raindrops going in or dust going in. And don't do it in a windy situation. Don't do it on the beach unless you turn your back to the wind, because you don't want to get any sand or grit and grime in the camera. All right, so how do we put it on? How do we put the lens back on? You see this white dot? You take that white dot and you line it up with the white dot that is right here on the mount. We line them up like this, and then we turn it away from us, and you get that click. One more time, you have the white dot there, we have the white dot here, you line it up, boom, and you click it in place just like that. Now let's move on to the memory cards, because we can't take any pictures if we don't have memory cards in the camera. Right here on the side is where your memory cards are stored. Pull this switch down, at the same time, shift your finger, then you let it flip open. Same thing to close it. You just close it, and then it locks in. So we open it up. This is where your memory cards go. Now, this is an interesting camera because it has two different memory card slots. The first card slot has what is called a CF Express Type A card. It's this new, more expensive type of memory. You probably won't buy this if you're an amateur, and I don't recommend that you do buy it unless you're really a pro. Now, to put it in, it can only go one way. You pop it in the top slot, you press it, and it's in there. Now, the bottom slot, being that you have two, is an SD card slot. So here is your SD card. A lot of you may already have these. If you're gonna be shooting video with this camera, you might wanna find a newer version card, something that's a little faster. Pro-grade digital is what we use here at the studio. These things are super fast, and they've worked out well for us in the past. So you pop that back in here, this time with the contacts facing you. You pop it in and you go like that. But what makes this one of the more unique cameras is that, let me take out the CF Express A card, let me take the same SD card, and guess what? It's reverse compatible up there. So now you can put an SD card up top as well. Now, being that we have two card slots, I am a big fan of redundant shooting. What that means is I like to have two cards in the camera at all time that are saving my images to both cards at the same exact time. And also it can do video as well at the same exact time. The reason I like to do redundant recording is that if something ever happens to one of the memory cards, well, you have the second one as a backup. I know you'll spend a little bit more money to do that, to put two cards in the camera, but it's well worth it if you're out on a shoot or you're on vacation and you got all these great images and then the card goes kaput. Does that happen a lot? No, not really. Knock on wood, knock on your forehead, because you don't want it to happen. It did happen to me once on a photo shoot in London, and I lost the video from one card because it didn't shoot redundant at the time, but I did have redundant photos, so I had all of my images. So that's my recommendation for that. Let me jump in here real quick because I want to show you our custom Lightroom presets called FroPack 3 in action with this photo taken with the Sony A7 IV. Now, if you're new to presets, they basically give you a great starting point even if you don't know how to edit. Check this out. We've got Prestige Worldwide with one click, takes our photo from what it was and gives it some processing like this. Then we've got November Rain. I love how that feels even with that added vignette. Then we've got Mount Airy, gives you that light and airy look that so many people like. Then King Contrast gives us a little bit more contrast, followed by Capone. Capone is awesome. It pulls out some of those colors but makes it super unique. And then we've got Fifth Element, and that's just a few of the presets with FroPack 3. Now I want to go up to FroPack 1 right now and show you Silvertide. Gives you a beautiful black and white that's silvery. Then we've got Black and White Boomify, which is also awesome. And I don't want you to forget that these presets all work on mobile. So look, if you're new to editing and you want to give yourself a great starting point, or you're trying to save time when you're editing your files, we created 15 all new custom Lightroom presets that you can check out right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/FroPack3. While you're over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters. And if you decide to pick them up right now, they are currently on sale. Or if you want to get the triple play bundle that has FroPack 1, 2, and 3, you can pick them up right now and save even more. Don't forget, they work on mobile extremely well. So now let's get back to the video. Continuing on, let's go to the top of the camera. We already talked about the on and off switch, but this is your shutter button right here. You press that halfway down to activate the autofocus, and when you press it all the way down, that's when your shutter will trigger and you will get a photo. If you hold your finger down on it and you're in continuous shooting, it will keep shooting photos as long as your finger is held down. You've got a red button right here that looks like a record button because it is a record button by default, but what's great about these Sony cameras is that a lot of these buttons can be changed. So if you don't want this to be the record button and you want it to be something else, I'll show you in the menu later how to make the change. You've got C2, which is a custom function button 2, which means there's also a C1, which is right here. C2 is up here on the top. C3 is back here on the back left, and C4 is going to explode when you press the button. No, it's not going to explode. It's not plastic explosives. It is right here. So this is the C4 button. It also so happens to be the Oscar the Grouch button because when you press it, Oscar the Grouch pops out and goes, "I'm Oscar the Grouch." I don't even remember what Oscar the Grouch sounds like, and he was my favorite of all the Sesame Street people. Was my favorite. But anyway, right there, that's your trash can for deleting images. And I guess being that we're here, I might as well just show you what the other buttons are back here. This is your play button. You will hit this to play back your images and be able to swipe through on your touch screen. This is a touch screen that can flip out and rotate. You can keep it closed like this to protect it when you're traveling, and then flip it back like this when you're going to use it. Now, switching over to here, you could see you could use it for vlog style. You could also flip it around like this and hold it like this so that you can use it for you looking at the image like this. You could do it up high, you could do it down low. So you have a lot of different options with this flip out rotatable touchscreen, which also brings up something else that I probably should have said a little earlier, the proper way to hold a camera. This is something that a lot of new photographers don't get. They'll sit there and they'll do this. This is not how you hold a camera. It's not very stable. You take your palm, you put it underneath the lens like this, right? It's nice and stable. You put your eye up to the viewfinder, and this is how you are stable. You have 3 points of contact, you tuck your elbows in, that's how you get stability. Now, I'm using this, which is the electronic viewfinder. This is basically a little TV screen that is showing you everything that the lens is capturing. You see it right through your electronic viewfinder. You might see people shooting these days like this. This is not a good way to shoot. I do not recommend using the LCD screen on the back as your primary way of shooting. Now, if you need to shoot with something over your head or down below and use the rotatable screen, that might be better. But get into the habit of shooting your photos and videos while looking through the electronic viewfinder. You'll just get better stability, and honestly, it looks a hell of a lot more professional than just holding it out in front of you. Below the EVF is a proximity sensor. That's how, look, I'll turn this on real fast. You can see this, look, whoop, it switches to the EVF, whoop, it goes back to the LCD screen. So if you get something like rain on there, it may think that there's something blocking it. So if it ever just sticks on using the electronic viewfinder, you might want to clean this off, and then you'll be good to go right there. This is your spinny wheel. This is how you can switch through images if you don't want to just swipe through the back of the screen. You can see that there's different menu functions that you can change. You can also set these differently in the camera as well in the different menu systems, because right now it's set to ISO is to the right. We've got the display is if you press up. Your OK button is right here in the middle. We have a function button. We'll see what that does when we turn the camera on. We've got a joystick with a lot of nipples. You can use this to move your focusing points around. It's really easy to do. We've got your AF on button. This is another button that's mappable and we can change, but you could use back button autofocus if you want. You might hear people talk about that. I personally do not believe in back button autofocus. Even to this day, I do not use it. You have an auto exposure lock button here as well. The menu button is right here on the left-hand side. Now, this is important if you wear glasses. Now, I wear glasses. I do not wear glasses to take photos. I cannot shoot photos with glasses on, so I turn them off. But I know a lot of people still need to wear them, so there is a diopter button slider right here. You would just move it up, you move it down while you're looking through a focused image. So you'll put your eye up to the electronic viewfinder, and you will use the continuous or you use the autofocus to make sure what you're looking at's in focus, and you just move the diopter up and down, and that is how you set that. That's one of the things that people forget. They don't realize that it's there and they think everything's blurry. Well, you can change it with the diopter. Top of the camera, we have a hot shoe. This is where you're gonna put a flash if you get an external flash. This is where you're gonna put a microphone if you get a microphone for vlogging or just capturing audio. Right here, we've got our dial, which controls, when you get it, it's probably gonna be in auto. I never shoot in auto. When you first get it, you may wanna shoot in auto, but it also restricts a lot of the custom settings in the menu that you don't have access to those if you set it to auto. P stands for program. It's basically full auto, but then unlocks the entire menu system so that you can pick certain things, but also the camera will basically do everything for you. We've got aperture priority, where you set the aperture and the camera will do the rest. We've got S, which is shutter priority, where you set the shutter speed and the camera's gonna do the rest. And you set to manual, which is where I like to shoot because I control my shutter speed, my aperture, and my ISO independently. Now, I know some of these terms may seem a little bit advanced for you, but I did create a 3-hour video guide for helping you get out of auto and to understand how to use your camera. You can check that out right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/guide. It's 3 hours. It's going to run you through the basics and fundamentals of the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, as well as take you out on, was it 3 or 4 photo shoots at the time? I believe it's 4 photo shoots. So it's 4 photo shoots. Now, I say I believe because we did that thing a long while ago using DSLRs, but a lot of the fundamentals that are in that video guide are going to be perfect teaching tools for you, even using this camera. So you can check that out. So head on over to FroKnowsPhoto.com/guide if you would like to pick that up. Continuing on, we've got a 1, a 2, a 3. Now, that's not for getting Tootsie Roll Pops or anything. These are custom settings where if I wanted to say, have my settings for outside as a basic starting point, I could set it to 1. If I wanted it for low light situations, I could set it to 2. And that means when I switch it to that, I'm like, okay, it's gonna give me a good starting point. You still need to make changes after that. And that brings us back to auto as well. Now, this right here, we have a good look at that, Steven? The dial for changing from photo to video? Okay, good. We've got photo to video. There is a switch that you press right here, and with your thumb, with your forefinger, I think that's they call this, is this the forefinger? 1, 2, 3, is that how it works? I don't know if it's a forefinger, it's my pointer finger. Hey, you should pay attention to this finger. You press right here, and right now we're on photo. That's what that icon is. Now we're on video. So when you want to go to video mode, you can switch into that. Then we have S and Q, which is slow and quick. That's where we get into our time-lapse type options, as well as being able to get slow motion footage. So I will put it back to photo because that's where we're going to talk about, or that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more. Flipping over to the bottom of the camera, if you have a tripod, this is your tripod socket. This is where you're going to put the tripod plate or connect it right to a tripod if you have a tripod. Moving on to the side of the camera, we have these port doors. These are all port covers. Right here, we move it out of the way. This is an HDMI input. That's where you're gonna, if you wanted to plug it into a TV to show people stuff, you could do that. If you're gonna record to an external recorder, you could do it right there as well. This top one right here with a red input, that is your microphone. So if you're gonna record audio, you can then put the input right into there. Below there, we have the headphone jack. So if you want to monitor audio, you put your headphone jack, your headphone in right there. And over here, we have your USB-C, as well as another multi-function plug that's a special plug from Sony. Now, this is where we can plug into the camera using the USB-C power to charge up your camera. If you ever are running out of juice, you plug it in there and you're good to go to get some extra power. Moving back around to a couple more dials on the camera. This dial right here, which isn't even marked, is perfect for your thumb. This controls your shutter speed. So when you're in manual and you want to control changing your shutter speed, you move to the right, it goes up, you move to the left, it goes down. This function button right over here, this is locked. This wheel is locked until we press the center of it. You press it, it unlocks it, and you can control it. Now you can set a bunch of different settings to this, and I believe by default, it is set to exposure compensation, which is a feature I've never used even when I shot film, and I still do not use it today. There is one more dial on the front. This is where you would control your aperture. You would just move it left, you would move it right, and that's going to change the aperture of your lens. So that runs us around the outside. I know a lot of it's basic and fundamental, but it's good to get a refresher, or it's good to just get the very basics, because you probably, if you've never had a camera like this, I know how helpful this is because I never had a video like this when I first started out. I had to figure it out on my own, ask a question of people who may not have had the answer. And look, there's no dumb questions. You gotta start somewhere, and if it's in the basics and fundamentals, then that's where we started. But now let's jump on to the menu system and run you through how I would set this camera up. Before I get into the menu system, I do need to point to the elephant in the room, and that is this Atomos on top of my camera. Now, the reason I'm using this is so that I can record exactly what we're seeing in the menu system so that you can see it on screen. Normally, we're not gonna be shooting like this, and also, because this is a touch screen, I do not have the ability to touch it when the Atomos is plugged in. So when you're going through the menu system, you'll be able to either touch it on the screen or use the up and down keys to do that. Normally, I would just touch the function button, but actually, I kind of use the old-fashioned way of doing it because sometimes touching it actually takes a little longer. Sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's not, but you choose what works for you. So to get into the menu, we hit Menu. And now you can see there's a ton of stuff in here. We'll just go over the left menu real fast. It says Star. This is my menu setting. This is where we can put custom settings that we want to get to often. Like maybe we want to get to battery often to see how much battery life we have left. We could put it here. We could put in silent shutter here. Silent shutter on, silent shutter off. We could put that here. So that's what you would be able to do in my menu. On the left, we've got shooting menu followed by exposure and color, focus, playback, network, and then setup, which goes super duper deep. Now, if you don't see all of these options right now, it's probably because you are in auto. And you can see we don't have all the same options anymore. And back to the top, we've got my menu setting. We can switch over to add an item. It's real simple. I arrow over. Let's go to image quality settings, and I hit the center button to hit OK, or you could just touch it. Where do I want to add it to? I want to add it to my menu number 1, and I want to add it in this location. So when I go ahead and hit menu again, it takes me back to the top. We have my menu, and you can see my menu settings right here, and my menu number 1 right inside there is image quality. So this is where you could stack everything that you want to stack to do custom. You'll just have to go through your own camera and see what you want there. Moving down, we've got the shooting menu. These menus run deep, by the way. We've got image quality, and you can see that there's all of these options under image quality. Then number 2, you got media. You can see there's all of these options. So we're gonna start running through them. The first thing that I do when I get a camera is I come here to image quality, no matter what camera brand it is, and I switch from JPEG to RAW. Now, if you don't know what RAW is, I shoot RAW. That's why I have these shirts, store.froknowsphoto.com, if you want to get one of these I shoot RAW shirts. But the best way I can explain what RAW is say you have the raw ingredients to bake a cake, and you burn the cake. I mean, you overcook it, it's dead, it's a brick, you can't eat it. Can you go back to the raw ingredients and start over if it's already baked? The answer is no. But if you have the raw file, it's like you have all of the raw ingredients to go back to time and time again. A JPEG file is compressed and baked. It's smaller and lighter because they throw away a lot of data that they don't think that you need, and you're left with a smaller baked in file. So if you, for example, shot it in monochrome, black and white, you could set that. It's throwing away the color data, and you'll never get that color data back. But if you shoot RAW, and it will show you a preview of black and white on the back monochrome, the raw data still maintains the color, and you can always get that back. RAW files are larger, they take up more space, but I started shooting RAW in 2002, 2003, and all of those RAW files from then, I can get better results in Adobe Lightroom with them today because I have the power of the RAW file. Now, JPEGs are done files. You don't really need to tweak them much after the fact, but RAW files, they'll come into your computer basically flat. Now, they may look one way on your screen in the camera, but when you get into the computer, it strips out all of that data, and you need to edit that. So as you can see, RAW is selected, and then we've got RAW file type underneath. Now, I'm gonna hit the center button again, the OK button, or you're gonna touch it with your touchscreen to go in here. You can see that it says RAW compressed. There's RAW lossless compressed, and there is RAW uncompressed. I personally shoot everything uncompressed. Now, conventional wisdom says that if you're using lossless compressed, you're not actually losing anything, but your computer will be more taxed when you are opening those files because it has to uncompress every single file that you have. I personally leave it in uncompressed. Now, if you thought that this camera gave you 10 frames a second, it actually does. When you're shooting in JPEG, you'll get 10 frames a second, or when you're shooting in compressed RAW, you will get 10 frames a second, but not in uncompressed RAW. You'll get about 6 frames a second. So if you're wondering why it slowed down just a little bit, well, that's because you are in uncompressed, and that's personally the way that I like to shoot. Now, if you're someone new and you're not sure about shooting RAW just yet, I do recommend that you go to RAW and JPEG. This way, you can have the RAW file for when you're ready to use those, but the JPEG if you want to just quickly get them out there into the world. So with that being said, we've got JPEG quality. Right now it's set, I believe by default it's set to fine. I change it to extra fine because, you know, we're all extra. I'm extra fine. Steven's extra fine. You're extra fine. Use the best quality possible. The thing is, you can always dumb down the quality, but you can't dumb it back up. So once it's done, if we went in here and we use light and we used a super small JPEG, you're gonna get a small file. You can never go back and get a bigger file. So I always leave it on extra. And JPEG image size, large, 33 megapixels. I'm always gonna leave it at the best of the best with honors, sir, because you can go up, you can go down, but you can't go back up. Then I hit OK to lock those settings in. Now back to the top, because this is number one, JPEG and HEIF switch. I just leave it to JPEG. I'm still not using the HEIF format. Some people may want to use it. I personally don't. Aspect ratio, 3:2 is the size of your image sensor. It's very similar to a 35mm piece of film. That is where I leave my aspect ratio. 4:3 is the old school TV, 16:9 is what you see in movies generally, and 1:1 is a square, kind of like Instagram. I'm not a fan of cutting off anything in the frame. Look, I leave it in 3:2. If you want to crop it later to a square, or 4:3 or 16:9, by all means go do it, but I believe the best place to be is 3:2. File format for video, it's going to tell you that a basic setting for movie shooting, you could see all these items when you set movie mode. That's when you rotate this dial, and we'll go into movie mode after we're done going over all the settings for stills. So it will just show you these basic formats. We'll get to that when we get into that section. Let me jump in here real quick and say, would you like me to send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations? If you said yes, look for this orange box over on FroKnowsPhoto.com, put your name, email address in it, hit send it, and I will send you that guide for free. Next up is movie settings. I'm gonna go ahead and skip that till we get to setting up the camera for movies. Next up, we've got something that says APS-C and Super 35 shooting. If you're not familiar with what any of this stuff means at any point, you can go ahead and hit this trash can button, and that trash can button is gonna bring up a little bit more information. It's not always good information, by the way. It's not always translated very well or very descriptive to explain everything, but in this case, when shooting still images, sets the recording in the APS-C size range. Yeah, that makes absolutely no sense. I mean, if you want to dumb it down to APS-C, you can do that. I wouldn't do that because we bought a full frame camera for a reason. If you do shoot Super 35mm, it's video, it's going to go ahead and make it crop down just a little bit, or if you use the older lenses that are not designed for full frame cameras, then you're going to automatically go into that setting if it's set to auto, which it is right now. Next up, we've got long exposure noise reduction. Currently, it is set to on. I'm going to turn that off. Long exposure noise reduction, you get extra noise the longer the exposure is open. The longer you let light hit the sensor, you might end up with some color noise, and I turn this off. I'm not a fan of any of the noise reduction that the camera does, and especially if you're shooting RAW files, it's not going to affect your file. It really affects your JPEG. Now, there is high ISO noise reduction. That is set to normal. There's low, and there's also off. I turn this to off as well. I don't want the camera softening my image, and what noise reduction does is it smooths out your image from not having grain. I come from a day where I shot film, and grain was normal, and grain is okay, grain is good in certain situations, but I wouldn't do the high ISO noise reduction, so I go ahead and turn that off. Color space is set to sRGB. I always leave it set to sRGB myself. We've got lens compensation. Right now it's set to auto. I turn all of this stuff to off myself. Chromatic aberration. This is all things that you could correct for in Adobe Lightroom at this point, but I turned it off because I want full control over my images and what I want to have corrected and not corrected. So that takes us to the end of literally just image quality, which is one under the red menu. Again, you could touch the screen. Don't forget that. I'm not personally touching the screen because I can't, because I have on this Atomos. Next, we move up to media. This is where you would format your card. Formatting your card, let's see what it tells me to do. If I hit 1, it's gonna be like, oh my God, performs quick format, all data will be deleted. Is that okay? I'm like, No. Don't do that, because I already have some pictures on this card and I don't want to reformat it. Once you reformat it, you're basically erasing everything on that card, and it's gonna be extremely difficult, even if at all, to get your images back. So do not reformat your card if you haven't backed up your images to your computer, as well to an external or as well to a cloud. Multiple backups is the key. But after you're done a shoot and you've already made sure that you backed everything up, then by all means, reformat both cards. I do that every time I start a shoot. I reformat both cards and I make sure that everything was already backed up. Record media settings. This is an important one. So you can see that we have a camera icon, and then a video camera icon. So the one is for stills and the other is for movies recording. So I'm gonna hit over, and right now it's gonna record to slot 1. Which is the CF Express A card. If I wanted it to go to the SD card, I would hit slot 2. But if I want to have recording to both cards, I would go to simultaneous recording. I like having pictures on both cards, like I said earlier. It just gives me peace of mind. And especially when it comes to video these days, you could go to video recording and we can hit simultaneous recording. You agree with that, Steven? Yep. Yeah. If you have the ability to save to 2 cards, take it, because if something happens, you at least have a backup. That's important. So I do that. Auto switch media is also off. I don't want it to auto switch. Let's see what it says. Sets whether or not to automatically switch the recording destination to media with remaining space just before the remaining space of the media used while shooting is depleted. I mean, that makes sense. That's basically saying if you didn't do the redundant recording and you were running out of space on one card, it could go ahead and switch to the next card. I don't do that. Just keep an eye on your cards. You get 128 gigabytes, you get bigger than that, or 64. Just keep an eye on your memory cards and go from there. Back out into the menu. We've got Recover Image Database. You might see that your camera will, when you turn it on, say you need to recover your image database, just hit OK. I don't even know why this does this. Let's see what Sony has to say. Recovers the image database for file, movies, enables recording and playback. No shit, Sony. Thank you. I mean, it says recover image database. So you think that means recover image database? The answer is yes. They're the only camera company that has this. So don't be afraid. If you see it, it will recover it and it should be fine and good to go. Display media info literally tells you what's on card 1. It says that I have 1,548 images left and 6 hours of video recording in the current recording settings that I have. That's not even something I ever go into because it just shows you that on the back of the screen anyway. File format folders. This is something I don't touch. I don't touch create a new folder. I don't touch IPTC information, but I do touch copyright information. This is important. You want your image, your name, your copyright information embedded inside of every picture that you take so that when someone finds it out there or you want to show that it's yours, you're like, yeah, it's baked right into the raw file. That is your information. So we can turn this to on to write it, but then we need to set the photographer's name. So you can see that this is okay, this is cancel. It's highlighted in orange. I hit okay, and we get the worst keyboard in the history of keyboards. What are we on, a Nokia phone from 1998? What is this, like I'm gonna have to hit it 17 times to get to the D? The answer is yes. So unfortunately, it's not as good as a QWERTY keyboard. You're just gonna have to go through there and touch each section. You can do that. You just touch it, you tap it. If you need a B, you tap it twice. Don't look at me like it's my fault. I didn't actually do that. So I would put my name in there, Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto in each spot, and then I would hit OK. That's for my photographer. And then copyright, you're gonna do the exact same thing. Display copyright information. That's gonna just show you that it says copyright, your name. I would do Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto, and you would do John Smith, Burt Bacharach. I mean, if you're Burt Bacharach, you'll be like, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. And he'd put his copyright information right in there. Now moving back out, we've got write serial number. This is confusing as hell because when you hit this again, it says sets whether or not to write the device's serial number when shooting still images. Well, the answer is yes. I want it to set write the serial number. Now it's not going to write it on your image. I tested it out. It wasn't written on my image like when you have the date and time burnt in, like a timestamp. But yes, I want the serial number written on the file because it's another safeguard to be like, oh, I took it with this camera. It would actually be cool if you sold your camera and then one day you found that camera again and you're like, that was my camera. You'd be like, oh, cool, I'm so amazing right now. Continuing on, let's move down to number 4, which is shooting mode. We're not gonna go through this in super detail, but if you wanted to set the custom 1, 2, and 3 on top of the camera, you would get your settings set, you'd come into here, and you would go ahead and set your camera set memory. You'd select 1, 2, 3. You can make the changes right here. This is where you would go ahead and make those changes. USB streaming, if you're going to be using this as a webcam, all of your settings are right here. You could set it to HD 1080p. Most streamers are not going to be able to stream at 4K because most systems don't allow you to do that. And you can actually record while you're streaming, which is pretty cool. So if you want to record while you're streaming, you can go ahead and do that. If enabled is selected, power consumption may be greater during USB streaming. Well, you know what you do when you're connected during USB streaming? That's interesting. You have to plug in through the USB port, so just know that you're going to use more power in that situation. Next up, we have drive mode. It's not where you actually drive your car forward or back. It's not for that. Right now, it's set to single. Now, a lot of these functions in the menu are set back here. So in this case, let me hit menu. We're going to go out. We're going to go out all the way to shooting again. You see this right here, Steven? You see these multiple frames? Yep. You would hit that, and now I can change it to high. I could change it to 10 self-timer. I could change it to the self-timer continuous, 10 seconds, 3 seconds, and all of these different options just from hitting that on the outside. So you don't need to go into the menu to actually do this. But now that we're here, I might as well show you that this is high plus. That's gonna give you the most frames per second that you can get. High is a little lower, medium, and of course, low for your shooting, and the one above it is for single shot. That's where you just take one picture. If you want to take multiple pictures, I can actually do this, right, without messing up. So let me take off my lens cap. Let me focus over here on, wow, it found his eye. That's how good IAF is. Let me hold the button down. And you can hear that I'm taking pictures. You can also see it being written to the card right now. Now back into the menu system. So yeah, that's where your continuous shooting would be changed. It's pretty self-explanatory. Bracket settings. What bracketing means is if you want to shoot one that's a photo that's a perfect exposure, followed by one that's off by a stop or over or under by a stop, you would go ahead and set it here. Bracketed shooting is good if you're doing real estate photos in houses where you want to get the outside exposure close to the inside exposure and you want to stack those images later in Lightroom. You can go ahead and do that. Interval shooting timer. This is really good that you have this built in. Say you want to just shoot the Milky Way or you want to shoot just a time lapse. You come in here, you would go ahead and turn this to on. You'd set your shooting start time. Do we want it 1 minute? Do we want it 1 second? However you want to do it. How long in between each picture, and then the number of shots that you want to take in a row. So it's a pretty powerful menu section, but yeah, it's nice that they have that built in because they didn't have it built in back in the day. Let me jump in here real quick and say, are you looking to build your very own website, a place for you to share all of your images that you're in control of, that isn't Facebook, that isn't Instagram? Well, I use something called Squarespace for my own website at jaredpolin.com. The reason I use it is it's simple, easy, affordable, and I guarantee you, you can have your website up in under 30 minutes because it's so easy to use because you don't need to know any coding. I don't know coding. You probably don't know coding. Steven definitely doesn't know coding. So if you want to get a 14-day free trial, head on over to squarespace.com/FroKnowsPhoto. If you decide that it's for you, use my code FroKnowsPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order. Now, let's get back to the user guide. Next up, number 7, we've got shutter/silent. So when I scroll over here, it says silent mode settings. We go in here and silent mode is currently off. So if you're in a quiet situation and you want to take pictures, you can turn the camera on to silent, which is going to allow you to use the electronic shutter instead of the mechanical shutter. There are some pitfalls to this. A mechanical shutter makes noise. Honestly, not that much noise in a camera like this, but an electronic shutter, if you're gonna shoot something that is fast moving, like a baseball bat or a ball in baseball, baseball, you can see that it would give it an oblong look because the sensor doesn't read out as fast. I know that's something you haven't heard before, but that's what the electronic shutter might give you. You might get some warping of the subject that you're photographing. Same thing would happen with a golfer if you were in the electronic shutter. But there's really no reason to be an electronic shutter if you don't need to be silent. If you need to be silent and you need to be quiet because you're shooting some kind of performance, then get into silent. It's the only way you're going to get the shot, and you're not going to really have that much of an issue unless there's fast moving objects like balls flying at your face. So we've got that out of the way. We've got shutter type. Right now we're on mechanical, or you could switch into electronic shutter. So if you go into electronic shutter and you don't turn off the noises, you will still hear the beeps of the camera, but you won't hear anything. Well, you'll hear an electronic shutter when you take a picture. We can hear that, right? Let's go hear that. Here we go. Oh wait, maybe because I turned it off before. Silent mode is off. Okay, good. It's completely silent. I know what I would need to do. I would need to change my focus to single. And you see how it still makes noise? And then if we go and we turn silent settings, we turn silent mode on. Yes, it's completely silent. I did it right. All right, that makes sense. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn silent mode back off. This is something that I would put into a custom menu if I was to use it, just so that I could hit a button and go completely silent. So if we're in electronic shutter, that's why, and you wanna be completely silent, you wanna make sure that, well, probably you're not in AF single. That's why in continuous it didn't make noise, because it doesn't make noise. Release without lens is enabled. Why would we want to do that? Why would I want to take pictures if the lens isn't on the camera? There's like one reason when you shoot weddings that you would do it, because look at this. Sometimes back in the day, people would take a lens, reverse it, hold it in front of the mount, and take a picture. So no lens is actually attached, but it would give them a macro look. Kind of weird, but it worked. But I would put this on disabled. Release without card. Why would we want it to release and take pictures without cards? So let's turn that off, because if you don't have a card in the camera, why would you want to shoot pictures? Okay. Anti-flicker setting, you can, wow, it gives you variable shutter. That is amazing. So if you're in an area where there's a lot of flickering lights, like an LED board, and it's flickering a lot and it's in the background and it's distracting, you can actually dial in shutter speeds in between 1/100th of a second. It could be 1/110.235 of a second. It's a little more complicated. It's a great mode to have that honestly was only in their most expensive $7,000 camera. They've now included it in this. So good on Sony for going ahead and doing that. Next up, we've got number 8 under their shooting menu. We've got steady shot, which is currently off for some reason, and that explains it. It's off on my lens right now. Let me turn it on. So let's see. Invalid with this lens. If the lens has a steady shot switch, perform the operation from the lens. I did do that. So what happens if you're in this situation? What that means is that this lens may not be compatible or needs to be updated with a new firmware to allow it to use the steady shot. Is it the end of the world? The answer is no, but it's just something that might happen if you ever encounter it. But steady shot is basically gonna help you counteract your movement. So if you're shooting slow moving subjects or inanimate objects at slow shutter speeds and you have steady shot on, there's a sensor in the camera and it is stabilized and it will counteract your movement, helping you keep things more in focus, which is really good for slow moving subjects. Now, if fast moving subjects are going across the screen and you are at a slow shutter speed, they're still gonna blur. Just keep that in mind. Number 9, we've got zoom range. I don't even touch this menu at all. Changes the zoom magnification. This function is currently disabled. I don't even come in here at all, so I don't even bother with this one. Shooting display. We've got grid lines are currently off. I don't put grid lines on. I don't like having grid lines on, but if you like having the tic-tac-toe board to help you line things up, then by all means, turn that on. You can change it to rule of thirds for grids. You have that. You have square grid, you have diagonal plus square grid. So basically you would have quite a lot of lines in the screen. Live view display settings, this is important. Now it's blanked out for me because I'm plugged into an external recorder, but if I was unplugged from this, you would want it to be on. always on, because what that means is when you look through the electronic viewfinder, what you see is the exposure right in front of you. So if your exposure is all the way off and it's super bright, that means that's what your image is going to look like. So it's giving you an exact representation of what your image is going to look like at the end, which makes it so much easier to get your exposure right. I didn't have that luxury when I shot film, but you have that luxury now when you have this camera. So that is an awesome feature to have. And that takes us through the shooting menu. And next, we're gonna move on to exposure and color. There's not a lot of stuff that I change here because it's something like exposure and ISO is something that you can change on the back of the camera. Right here, we have, it's right here to the right. You would hit right and then it would turn on the ability to change your ISO. Now, if you don't know what ISO is, remember back to the film days. Hopefully you remember film. When you were indoors and in a low light situation, you would use a higher number ISO. If you're outside and it's super duper bright, you use a lower ISO because you have more light. Right now it's set to ISO auto. When you first start out, that might not be a bad place to go. I personally don't do that because it changes the ISO for every image that you take, basically. I like to control this myself. I would go over here to ISO and I would just scroll down to have it locked at 100. Or 120 or 125 or 160, wherever I wanted it to be. But to start, if you want to get into auto ISO, the camera is going to control that for you. Now there's ISO auto minimums and maximums, meaning it will not put the ISO any lower than 100. And then in this case, it will not put the ISO up any higher than 12,800. Now, if you want to limit it, we can go over here and then I just scroll. So I'm like, okay, I don't want it to go above 6400 ISO. Then I would hit the OK button, which is the center button. And this is where you would set it for both stills and video. Moving on, it says ISO range limit. This is actually different than the one we were just in because look, it says set the range when setting the ISO manually. So it will allow us to set it to as low as ISO 50 and as high as 204,800. That is all the way up there, AKA Swiss cheese mode. ISO auto minimum shutter speed, I leave that on standard. Exposure comp is not something that I get to on the back of the camera. You can control it from the top dial. But again, I said it earlier, I do not change exposure compensation at all. You have a live representation of your exposure in your eyeball. It's right in front of your face. If you can't get it right there, I'm not compensating for anything. I just get, no, maybe I am compensating for some things, right, Steven? Yeah, that's a funny joke. Hey, but yeah, no exposure compensation. Metering modes. In this day and age, I leave this all alone. I leave this exactly where it's set. Back in the day, I would go to spot metering if I had a person in front of me and I only wanted to expose for their face. Nowadays, what do you have? An electronic viewfinder with the exposure right in front of your face. Okay, so you see it right in front of your face. You don't really need to worry about the metering anymore. If you put a flash on top of your camera, this is where you would go to change different settings, but we don't have a flash here, so we're not talking about it. White balance is another thing that you can set on the outside of the camera. What I mean by that is without going into the menu, you've got different buttons to activate that, but let's go into, you've got white balance. It's currently on auto. When you shoot RAW, the white balance can be changed later without changing your image or hurting your image quality at all. I like to leave it in auto for the most part, except if I'm in a situation where it's a studio situation and the lighting is always gonna be exactly the same, then I'm gonna lock in the white balance so it's the same from picture to picture to picture. With auto, it might change from picture to picture to picture, and I honestly don't care. I leave it on anyway, mostly auto. Now, let's read what this says. For a priority set in auto white balance, sets the color tone to prioritize white shooting under incandescent lights when white balance is set to auto. So I like to set this, I think standard is a good place to be. You can see that you have auto white balance for more ambience, which is gonna be a little more warmer, and then white is gonna be a little cooler. I generally do it on the white thing, but I just leave it for standard for the most part because it works really well. Shutter AWB lock. What does that even mean? Sets whether or not to perform auto white balance lock when shutter button is pressed. You can stop, okay, this is not even a thing I ever touch, so we are not even gonna go in there. Would you like to show the world that you shoot RAW? Well, if so, head on over to store.FroKnowsPhoto.com to check out all of the different I Shoot RAW swag that you can wear. Moving on, we've got color/tone. The one menu setting I'll go into here is the creative look. Right now it's set to ST, which is standard creative look. Then you've got PT, you've got NT, which is neutral, you've got vivid. Next up, we've got VV2. These are all different looks that are only going to affect your JPEG file when you're shooting stills. If you're shooting video, this will also affect your video file as well, but you could set that in the video setting as well. Now, RAW files are flat when they come into the computer, so you could always change it. Remember, the JPEG is baked in. So if we were gonna go down to monochrome or black and white and we shot JPEG, it would only be black and white. If we shot RAW, it would show up black and white when you preview it, but you could still then click color and send it back into color because you still have all of that data. Generally speaking, because I shoot RAW, I leave it in standard. If you're gonna shoot JPEG, it's all gonna be dependent upon what you're shooting. You need to make sure that you lock this in at a good place. If you over sharpen it and you're shooting a wedding and the bride is over sharp and it looks terrible, you can't dumb it down later. Always remember that. Another good reason for shooting RAW. Now let's say you want to custom set this yourself. We could hit the arrow to go over. We could change the contrast. We could go up a little bit. We could change the highlights. We can change shadows, fade, saturation, sharpness range, as well as clarity. So you need to play with all of these to see what works for you. I tweak them just a little bit because I want the JPEG preview on the back of the screen to be more reflective of how I would edit, but that does not affect my RAW file at all. So always go ahead and remember that. Picture profile is more geared towards a super advanced setting that we're not gonna touch today. It's also something that I don't touch whenever I'm shooting either. Zebra display, let's read what that says to help you understand it. Oh, and if you hit the trash can and nothing happens, then it's not going to tell you any information. So I just scrolled over. Zebra display sets whether or not to display the stripes to adjust brightness based on the zebra level setting. This is a little bit more advanced if you're shooting. I don't use zebras when it comes to stills. When Steven's shooting video, he's going to use zebras to help him see his exposure. If he sees a lot of zebra lines, that means it's overexposed and blown out in those areas, and you could dial it back down to be better. Moving on. We are finally out of that section. So once you get past the red menu, the shooting menu, it moves a lot quicker. Now we're gonna move into our focus menu settings. Right now it's set to single shot AF. This is where you could go and change it to automatic AF. So I don't use automatic AF. What automatic AF does is it chooses between single shot and continuous AF. The camera will make the decision for you, and that is the worst decision in my opinion. Let me explain single shot AF for you real quick. What single shot is if I was sitting here and I'm not moving and you're not moving and you wanted to just focus on me, you press the button halfway down and you will hear a beep if you have the audible beep on. That beep is letting you know that it's in focus. As long as you leave your finger pressed halfway down on the button, the focus will not shift. But if I move back or I move forward, and your finger is still halfway down on the button, it's not gonna change, which means the image might be out of focus. In this day and age, continuous AF is the place to be, especially that this camera offers you IAF, where it will continuously track the subject's face or eye. There's no reason to be in single for almost anything at this point. Of course, there's a few reasons you would do it, but right now, I'm in it 99% of the time. Actually, I don't know the last time I switched into single point AF. I just stick to continuous at this point. We've got priority set AFS. So AFS is the single shot AF. That's what it looks like, AFS for single. AFC is for continuous. Right now it's on balanced emphasis. Let me read what it says. Sets the function to release the shutter even if not in focus when focus mode is in AFS. I leave this on balanced. All of these I leave on balanced. AF tracking sensitivity. You could make it stay longer on a subject before a distraction gets in the way or before a distraction would become the thing that gets in focus. So for example, you've got a soccer player, and if you want to focus on the one player that's running towards you, but someone crosses their path, will the camera connect and autofocus on them quicker or slower? That's what we're saying. So if you want it to be locked on the subject, you would then want to move it to 1. Or if you want it to be super responsive and change super quick, you would then put it to 5 responsive, or just leave it in the middle in standard. This is trial and error for yourself. It's still really fast either way you slice it, but you just have to play with it to find out what works for you. AF Illuminator. I want to see what they say about this. Sets the AF Illuminator, which sheds light on a dark scene to aid focusing. I honestly wish they went into more detail here, but that's easy. There is an AF Illuminator somewhere here on the front. There it is, Steven. Let me turn it this way. Right there. You see it? Kinda? Yeah, that's where the AF Illuminator comes from. That is an LED light that will shine out in low light situations to help shed some light to help the autofocusing system. It's also a distraction. If I'm shooting a concert and there's this light blinking, and that could be a distraction to that person. If I'm shooting a portrait, it could be a distraction to that person. I've turned that off with every brand camera that I've ever had. I turn that off because if I'm in a super low light situation and I need that light to focus, it's probably too dark to take pictures anyway. So I turn it off of auto and I turn it to off. AF drive in AF, I leave this personally on standard. We've got AF with shutter. Let's read what that says. Sets whether or not focus by autofocus when half pressing the shutter button. That is on. You'll hear people talk about back button autofocus from time to time. I've never shot, I've tried it back in the old days to do back button focus, and I've never liked it. There are still people that swear by it, but in a DSLR world, the older type of camera, it may have worked better there, but here with continuous autofocus, locking on and tracking eyes, I use the shutter button. That's how it's done. That's how I've always done it, and I think that's the way that you guys should do it as well. What else do we have here? Pre-AF is off. I don't want it to, sets whether or not to perform autofocus before the shutter button is half pressed. I don't want it changing autofocus, because look, if I was just like this, it would just keep focusing until I press it halfway down, then it would find and keep focusing. I don't like that at all, so I turn that off. And that takes us out of that menu. So we just finished purple A1. Let's go to focus area 2. We start with focus area. Right now it's currently set to wide. You can access this through the outside of the camera. I never go back into the menu to make this change. I do it on a quick button that is set already on the outside of the camera. So I'll probably use something like focus area spot medium, or you've got small, or there's lock on tracking, which we will show you when we get out into the camera area. Focus area limit. So what this means is that it doesn't limit how it autofocuses. It just limits how many options you actually see when you go to have those options. So you could turn any of it, tracking wide. You could turn all of these different things off. So if I don't want it to show center fix, I could do that and hit OK, and it's no longer going to show me that option. It's really nothing to worry about there either. Next up is switch the vertical and horizontal AF area. That is currently off. I leave that off. When I go vertical, I want the focusing point to stay in the same place that it was when I was in horizontal. I don't want it bouncing all around. I end up moving it myself, or with the lock-on tracking, it just works extremely well these days, and I don't worry about it. Next, we have focus area color. It's currently set to white. Let me show you actually what this means. So take this front cap off. You can see the box in the middle of the screen. That is white. So look, we've got Steven over here. Say hi, Steven. See that? See how it found his eye? That's how IAF works. It's just incredible. Boom, and I took a, oh, boom, look, I took another, oh, boom, I took another picture. When you take your finger off, this box that is moving is in white. But if we go back into the menu and change it to red, we now come back, oh, look at that, the box is red. But when you go back to Steven and hold the button halfway down, and that you see the green button in the bottom left, that's also showing us that it's in focus. That's why it comes back on. That's how we get IAF. Look at that, found him right there. So that is good. Let me put our lens cappy cap back on and go back into the menu. So you could leave that red or white, it's up to you which one you want to use. Next up, there's AF area registration, delete registration AF area auto clear. These are all things that I've never ever touched in my life, so I don't use those, and I just skip right past that, as well as area display tracking, it says, tracking, which means during tracking. What do they say here? Sets whether or not to display the focus area frame during autofocus while the focus area is set to tracking. Well, this is something that I leave off as well. AF continuous area display, we leave on. Phase detection area, something we don't also use, that's off. And circulate focusing points is something that I do turn on. Let's see if I can actually show you. You see how I'm keep moving my finger all the way to the left? And then you see how it shows up on the right? That means circulate. If I didn't have circulate on, it would just get stopped at the bottom and wouldn't go back to the top. So I like it on circulate. Steven doesn't like it on circulate. It becomes personal preference after a while, but I leave it there. And then AF frame mode amount, sets amount of movement, focus area frame, available when focus area set to spot or expanded spot. I leave this on standard as well. A lot of these functions just go super deep and are things that you never touch. You don't need to know what every little thing is and where to set it. Sometimes just the standard is fine. And that's why I'm hitting the things that I personally think need to be hit. Now, face slash IAF is the greatest invention since sliced bread. You saw how it just tracked Steven's eye. It just found it. I didn't need to move a focusing point. The camera knew that it was his eye. And he's sitting in some dark area right now and it still found him. So face and eye priority in AF. Yes, I want eye and face priority on. Now, face and eye subject, you go in here, if you're gonna be photographing a human, you put it on human. If you're gonna be photographing an animal, you do animal. If you're gonna be photographing a bird, which is an animal, right, Steven? A bird's an animal? Yeah, a bird's an animal, but I guess more people like to shoot birds, so it gives them the option to say, oh, I'm shooting a bird, not just an animal. I mean, we're actually animals too, but anyway, make sure you remember that if you had it on for bird or animal and you're gonna photograph people, to put it back into human, it is slightly different. Next up is subject select setting. This means if we didn't wanna have bird ever come on, we just go ahead and click that and hit OK, and now that option will not even show up when we go to do it. You'd have to come back here to turn it off or to turn it back on. We've got right/left eye select. Right now it's set to auto, so if Steven was looking directly at me, it would just pick whichever eye is closer, but you could actually change this to say, well, I want it to be the right eye, or I want it to be the left eye that it always selects. This is dependent upon which eye is closer to you and what looks right in the frame. Currently, I leave it on auto, and sometimes there is a button, a custom button we can set that will toggle between left and right eye when it gets there. But auto, generally speaking, works out pretty well. Face and eye frame display is currently off. Sets whether or not to display the detection frame when a face or eyes are detected. Available when face/eye priority AF is on. It's currently off and it works the way that I want it to work right now. Even when I turn this mode on, I didn't see anything change, so I will leave this one on off. Face memory, I don't even go into there. Register faces, I don't register any faces either. Like, that's just weird to me. Auto magnify in manual focus. So if you're in manual instead of autofocus, it will magnify into the middle of the frame. I actually hate this. Do you hate that, Steven?
I like it for video.
Yeah, for video. It's good when it comes to video, but I think it's distracting because it messes with my framing. Why are we shooting manual focus anyway? 9 billion times out of 9 billion and one times are we going to be shooting in autofocus. So this is something that I turn off. Focus magnified time is, if you did leave that on, how long would that magnification stay on the screen? A long time, a short time, doesn't matter to me because I don't use it. Initial focus magnification is 1x. You could change that to, wow, 5.5x. That would go in quite a long way. And AF in focus magnification is on. So if you were gonna do the magnification, it's still going to autofocus while you're doing that. Next up, we've got peaking display. If you're gonna be shooting in manual or doing manual focus for video, then you would go into this mode. But right now, we are not going to go into there because that's super detailed if we were to go further. Now let's jump into the playback menu. Now, I rarely come in here because there's not much to change, and I'm gonna show you when you hit the play button on the back of the camera, what happens, what's on the screen, but let's go through this menu real quick. We've got playback target, magnification, selection memo, delete, edit, viewing, playback options. None of this stuff is anything that I ever touch, so I skip past it. But to get your image up on the screen, you hit this play button. You should all know what a play button is by now. And you hit it, and there is your image. Now, when I hit up, where it says disp, which is display, it rotates and cycles through the options that you have. Right now it shows me the date, the time this picture was taken, that it was shot RAW, as well as JPEG fine. We've got 1/250th of a second. We've got f4. We've got ISO 6400. The folders don't matter. Don't change, I've never changed a folder in all of my years of having folder options to change. It also shows me how much battery is up, and it's that this 30 out of 30 is not ESPN's 30 for 30. That means that this is the 30th picture. To rotate through, you could swipe on the screen, which I can't do because it's not active for me right now, or you could just rotate this dial right here, and we're rotating through the pictures that I've taken. Some of them are blank because they're blank. Now, if I hit up, you can see color histogram, a regular histogram, all of your settings. Your picture style settings too are located there as well. If I keep hitting up, we're back to the normal, just the image itself. So that's really it. Now to zoom in on an image, AF on button, right next to it, you see there's a magnifying glass. I can hit the button and I'm zooming in. You can see the little orange square getting smaller and smaller. To move that around, we could use the joystick with knipples, or we could use the up, down, left, right, BA, select, start option. And I believe if I hit the center button, it should zoom all the way back out. So that's how you move around the image like that. Now, if you want to go and see a checkerboard, we've got this auto exposure lock button. Next to it, there's a checkerboard. If we hit that, then we can run through the images even quicker if that's what you want to do. If I hit it again, does it get smaller? It does. Wow. Oh, geez, it goes to date. That is something I've never looked at because why would I do that? So then I zoom back in with the other button right there. Rotate, rotate, all these different pictures, and then to delete, let's talk about deleting. I do not delete any images off of the camera when I'm shooting. I never do. I actually keep every RAW file, and every image that I capture is saved forever, just because I don't feel like going through and deleting it. I also don't want to accidentally delete something that I might want to use because I'm looking at it on a small screen. But if you really want to delete, you hit the trash can and you hit delete. Let's see. Delete. Oh my God, it's gone. It's all gone. Don't do it. There's no reason to do it. Let's jump back in to the menu system right here. That's how you go through your images. It's real simple. The next menu that we have is the networking menu. There's a lot of videos on the interwebs on YouTube that will go into detail on how to set each one of these things up, but this is where you would go if you want to use your smart connector. You want to connect it wirelessly to your phone to control the camera from your phone or an iPad or some other device. It actually works out pretty well. You can see over here, you want to register your smartphone, select on camera and send, reset transfer status. You just need to go through all of this stuff because it would take me way too long to break that all down right now. But you have transfer mode, you could do FTP transfer function, PC remote function, Bluetooth remote control. You've got Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, wireless LAN, as well as networking options like airplane mode, which will turn off the Wi-Fi and the option altogether. It's another thing I don't even touch, but I guess if you want to save power, you could go ahead and turn that off. So again, not a menu that I spend a lot of time in. If I'm going to want to send a file to my phone, I would come into here, I would download the software for Sony, and I would connect to my phone to the camera and transfer images that way if it's something I wanted to do quickly, but most of the time I'm not really using this. Some other people use it a lot more. Let me jump in here and say, are you looking for a solution to print your own photos at home? Well, we use Canon inkjet printers here at the studio. We've got the Canon Pro 1000, but they also offer a Pro 200, a Pro 300, and a lot of different options that might be perfect for you. For more information, head on over to the link down below that says Canon Printers. Now, the setup menu is extreme. It is 13, count them, 13 different things long. So let's start at the top. We've got area and date. So of course you can change your language. If you don't want it to be in English, you can change it to something else. You've got your area, date, time settings. So we can see that it's set to New York or Bogota. I mean, we could be in Colombia. Medellin! Oh, Steven, you like that one? Victory! Entourage references for those who don't know. But you got your area settings. You can come in here and change where you're going, and it will not teleport you there if you, Tijuana. Let's go to Tijuana. No, we're gonna keep it in New York and Bogota. Medellin! Daylight savings time. Soon we won't have this in the United States, so thankfully we can get rid of that at some point. We've got date, time settings, date format. It's self-explanatory, guys. I don't really need to show you how to do that. Reset save. So if you want to go ahead and reset the entire camera and get rid of all the settings that we just put in there, we would do that. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to do that. If you want to save your settings in the camera that you've set, you've spent a lot of time getting them set up, you could go to Save Load Settings. You put an SD card in or another card into the camera, you could go Save Load Settings. So it wants me to, I could save the settings that I've set in the camera to the card. Then what you do after you save them is you put the card into the computer, email yourself that little file, and you put in the subject line like Sony A7 IV Save Load Settings so that you can always access it if you need it. If you lose all your settings or you get another camera, you can take the same settings from here and add it to the new camera, because there you would go to load. You would put it back on the card, a fresh card, and then you would load it back into the camera. Now, if you update your firmware, then what you want to do after you do that is you want to save the settings again to the card and email yourself the updated save load settings so that if anything ever happens, you can go back to that. That's a good setting if you have multiple of the same camera. You can't go from this camera to a Sony A1 and save load settings there because it's a totally different camera. It wouldn't work. Operation customization. Oh my God, this is a long one. Now, if we see, you see how there's a camera on this one and a video icon on this one? This means we would be customizing the keys and the dial settings for photos. I'm not going to go too deep into this because it makes total sense. Do you see how it's highlighting a button in orange? It's telling you which one you would want to change. So if I want to change 4, which is the C button on the back, I would go ahead and go in here, and then I could change to any of these other settings. So if I want it to be, like I mentioned earlier, silent shooting, and I want to switch the shutter, I want to switch the shutter type, boom. So now that should be saved. Let me go out of here. Let me hit this button right here, the C3, and see the option? I now have the difference between, I could switch between mechanical and electronic with one press of the button. So a lot of these buttons are mappable and you can do anything you want with it. That's one thing that I put over on the left-hand side because I won't accidentally hit it as easy as I would with a button on the right-hand side. So that's how you make that change. But you see all of these different options. Every different button, every which way you want to do it, you can make changes. Even changes to the buttons on the lenses. If your lens has a button, you can go ahead and make a change there as well. You can change your dials. You can change almost everything. Back into the menu, if we wanted to change it for video, we could go, oh, well, I don't want that button to do the same thing. Oh, wow, look at this. It's all not even set. It says follow custom. We would have to make a change. They're not even set right here. So we could go in here and be like, okay, I want to come in here and for video, I want it to be image quality, recording setting, and there you go. So when I go back out, I'm not in video mode. I'd have to switch this to video mode, like there, hit this button, and there is changing record settings. It's really simple. You just need to go through and customize it for yourself. And this is why you want to do the save load settings after you do all of this, because there's a lot of customization that you can do. You could do custom key settings for playback, because that's what this means. We could also do the function menu. We haven't even talked really about the function menu. The FN button on the back of the camera is a pretty powerful button. I'll go in there right now real quick. You can see that this is how it is set. I could change drive mode, focus area, ISO. I mean, all of these things I just mentioned are all actually in buttons already, so you don't really need to go into the function too often to do that. But if you want to change the function settings, you go in here, you go to function settings, and I'd be like, oh, I don't want flash here, so let me go ahead and change that to, well, I don't even want metering either. I'm so literal with this stuff. Well, let's just make it silent. I want silent mode. So I put silent mode on. Now silent mode's in there when it comes to stills. If you want to make the changes, customize your FN button for video, you have the same thing. What's really good about this Sony is that you have different function settings when you're in photo and when you're in video. So that's really good right there. That's where you do all your customization. Next up, we've got different set for stills and MV, whatever MV stands for, movies. It says set whether to apply common settings for still image mode and movie mode or apply different settings. So let's see, it says you can set different settings for still image mode and movie mode in the next screen. The setting set for checkmark is independent. Wow, that's pretty cool. So you could change this that if you wanted to have different settings when you go from photo to video, you could go in here and do this. I've honestly never really gone into there to change anything. We've got display screen, display set. Let's see, monitor. Oh boy, you could turn off different things that you don't want to see. So do we want all info to show in the monitor? Yes or no? Well, I do. I don't turn that one off. No display info, histogram. If anything that I'm changing, I keep the histogram. I mean, you have all these different options. It's great. No, and not monitor off. No, I keep this all the way that it is. So many different options that you have to change for the monitor. Now the Finder, I like displaying all info. I like seeing that on the back of the screen. So I'm gonna turn that one on and hit enter. Lots of customization here. Record with shutter is currently off. That should only affect when we're in video. Sets whether or not to perform movie recording with the shutter button during movie. Yeah, I actually like this. Steven, you like this one?
Yes.
Yeah, I like it too because it's just easy to start and stop there, but you do have a button right here for recording video. You could change that if you want, but I kind of like having the option that in video mode, that when I press the shutter, it starts recording, and when I stop the shutter or press it down again, I no longer am recording. Next up, we have dial customization, which to the best of my knowledge, seems to kind of do the same thing when we scroll up that we already did, because we can see we changed number 4 to shutter type and it's set to shutter type. So maybe it just means this for changing your dials. I don't change any of these settings, so I'm gonna skip right past that. You can see you could do it for video, my dial settings, all the stuff that I leave alone. Touch operation, so you could turn off the touch panel. You could turn it on, you could turn it off. Touch panel pad, touch panel only, touchpad settings, touch position. So you can set this that if you want to control moving your focusing points, we could say, all right, we want it on the right of the screen. Whereas if I put my eye up to the viewfinder, I can use the touch sensitive screen while I'm looking through the camera to move the focusing points. That is a quicker way to move the focusing points if you need to do that. In this day and age with IAF, it's not really necessary because the camera mostly finds where it needs to go. 99% of the time, it's good, and it's pretty quick to use the knipple button here, joystick, to move everything. So I don't even change this at this point. This was a great function before we had this new technology. Now that we have it, I don't really use it as often. Accessibility, this is interesting. I didn't even know this existed, but check this out. I'm gonna turn this on and it's gonna start reading everything. So basically, if you're lonely and you want someone to talk to you, she will talk to you. I'm assuming that this is for people that have a hard time seeing, and some people may be like, well, why are you a photographer if you can't see? Well, some people just don't see that well, and they can't see, but they can look through the camera, and this thing will tell them all of the information. That's an interesting mode. We won't be using that most likely. Finder/monitor. Select Finder, Monitor, that is set to auto. Monitor brightness, I like that to be set to manual. Basically, if you're outside, you can make it super bright. If you're inside, you can make it lighter. But remember, if you're looking for your proper exposure and you're basing it off of the brightness of the screen and you've changed the brightness of the screen, that might throw off your exposure a little bit. Now, viewfinder brightness, I can't change right now because I'm plugged in with this Atomos here, but I leave that set to auto as well because I don't want it super bright and throwing off my brain to think that, oh, it's bright, I need to change my exposure. So I leave it to auto, which means it's going to change depending on the brightness that you're in. It's gonna get brighter for outside, it's gonna get darker for inside. You just gotta get used to it. You'll find that happy dance and that happy medium area to make it work for you. Display quality is currently set to standard. You have the option to change it to high. You have Finder and frame rate, same thing, standard or high. If you're shooting sports, you may want to change your Finder to high. Now it will be a little lower resolution, but it will be a faster refresh rate. So that's up to you. I don't think you're gonna notice too much of a difference. Just play around with that to see which one works for you. Let me jump back in here and say, when you're ready to pick up some new lenses or accessories for your cameras, check out allenscamera.com. They are a mom and pop store that's been around since 1977. They've supported me since the beginning of FroKnowsPhoto, and I've supported them for as long as I can remember. And if you're looking for a mom and pop experience where you can actually talk to someone and get some help, head on over to allenscamera.com and let them know that the Fro sent you. Now we're number 8, we've got display options. We've got gamma display is off, gamma display assist type is auto, remain shoot display, not displayed. What does that even mean? Sets whether or not to display the remaining amount of still images that can be shot. The still image shooting speed may decrease when remaining amount is empty. Well, of course your shooting speed will decrease when it's empty because you have no more pictures to take. Let me see if this is what I think it is. It is what I think it is. So you see this line next to the H+ between the copyright? As I take pictures, that's my buffer. So I'm gonna take this lens cap off real quick. We're in high, and that should start to go down. Oh boy, wow. You see how it's going down? That's your buffer. There, we run out, and it won't take any more pictures because we ran through. Now keep in mind, I'm running out of pictures much quicker than most people because I have it set to RAW plus JPEG fine. If you're not shooting JPEG fine, it's not gonna save the JPEG fines, and you'll get a little bit more in the buffer with just the RAW. If you just shoot JPEG, you're basically gonna get an infinite buffer, and you're not gonna run out of, you're really not gonna outrun it because JPEGs are much smaller. So yeah, I actually like that on just so I can see how much is left in my buffer. Auto review is something I turn off and leave off. Remember back in the day, you would take a picture with a camera, and then it would show you the image right after you do that? That's distracting as hell when you're trying to take a lot of pictures, so I personally leave that off. Next up, we've got power setting options. One of the only things that I change here is auto power off temperature. I put this to high. So let's see, the temperature of the device may rise to prioritize recording time. Would you like to make this change? The answer is yes, I would like to make that change. Ooh boy, what was that breathing? I don't know. So if you're in a high temperature area, you're recording a lot of video, it's going to allow the camera to record longer. Yes, it may get hotter. It shouldn't damage your camera. No one really knows by the time that you're done using the camera. Nobody really knows. But I mean, if you're in an extreme environment and it gets super duper hot and it shuts down, then that just means that it was overheating, and you don't want to keep it going if it's overheating. Sound options. You've got your volume settings, you've got your 4-channel audio recording that you could do, and audio signals are currently on. That gets a little bit more advanced, so we're not going into there. USB connection mode, select when connected, USB streaming, mass storage. Wow, shooting mass storage, that's pretty cool. MTP, I don't know what MTP, connect with MTP fixing. Thanks, Sony menu system, for being very explanatory. PC remote, right now I did select when connected. So we've got that. USB settings, multi-USB power supply is on. So if we plug in with a USB power, which is pretty cool, you can get power from the USB. External output, I'm not gonna change that right now because I'm using the recorder, but this is where you would go to change your settings. And the HDMI display info on, control for HDMI. Most of this stuff you guys aren't going to go into because you're not gonna be using those settings. Setup options, video light mode, don't even touch that. Anti-dust function, I don't touch that. Auto pixel mapping is on, but I don't even use that. Pixel mapping, I don't touch, and version is where it tells you what your firmware is currently. You would come here to update your software when you need to update your firmware. They don't put out updates very often, but when they do, this is where you would go and make those changes. And that is your setup menu and all of your menu settings for the setup menu when it comes to stills. Now we want to jump into the video menu settings just to show you a few things. Now we have switched from photo mode to video mode. I'm going to hit menu, and you can see that we are now on a video camera. So we're changing those settings. So we've got image quality. There's not a lot to change throughout this menu if you've already set it for stills, but when it comes to changing frame rates and quality that you want to shoot, this is where we're going to go. Image quality. So here we have file format. It's normally set right here in XAVC SHD. So that's your 1080 HD. I can't change it right now or it's gonna mess up my recording, but we like to go to the highest quality that you can, which is the HS 4K. Down at the bottom is your lower quality. Remember, you can always dumb it down, you can't dumb it back up. We've said that a little earlier. Movie settings. So we scroll down here, we hit over, we can change your frame rate. You've got 24p and 60p. 24 is gonna give you more cinematic look. We've got record settings. We like to go to the highest quality because if you got the highest quality, you might as well use it. Same thing, can't dumb it back up. Next, we've got SNQ, which is your slow and quick settings. I can't change it to show you 120 frames per second because we're in the 4K mode. So you'll need to go down to 1080 to be able to access 120 frames a second there, which is gonna give you cool slow-mo footage. You know, you got a skateboarder, you're like, do a kickflip. And then you get them and you're like, do another kickflip. And then they're like, screw you, these are rollerblades. And you're like, oh, sorry. Anyway. Let's go back out here. Proxy settings. We don't use that, but a proxy is a smaller recording of the higher res recording that you're doing so that when you put it into the computer, you can edit that and it's gonna be less taxing for your computer. Next, we've got your APS-C or your Super 35 shooting. We leave that on auto, and then you've got lens compensation. We already turned this off before. So those are really the settings that I change. Everything else is gonna be the same that we already set. It's just now that we are here, we are changing those things just for video. Since we're already in the video mode, let's show you a walkthrough of what you're gonna see when you either look through the viewfinder or use the back of your screen. Starting the top left, we've got, it says we're in video mode because there's a video camera there, and we are in manual because we are in manual settings to control my aperture and ISO and shutter speed. Let's see, the front dial is gonna change my aperture. We can see that changing. The back dial is gonna go ahead and change my shutter speed. I actually don't have a button set for ISO yet, but we already have a dedicated one here in the back. You can see, you can just change it. It's set to auto currently, but it's real easy to get to all of these buttons. Top right next to the manual, you've got both cards. It shows you have 6 hours and 15 minutes of record time on card 1, 4 hours, 57 minutes on card 2. It shows you what video mode we're in. It shows you how many frames, 24p. It shows you the bit rate, 420, 10-bit. We can see we have 37% battery left. The more video you shoot, the more battery you're gonna chew up. We're chewing up battery much quicker because the screen is constantly on because I'm showing you everything. Below the battery is your meter. Your light meter really doesn't matter that much anymore. We've got auto white balance set, that's the AWB. We've got DRO is set to auto, that's dynamic range optimizer. Then we've got our picture style with a plus next to it, meaning that we made some slight tweaks to it. Remember, when you set your picture style for video, it's going to be baked in. So if you shoot in monochrome, your video is always going to be in monochrome. It's not like you're shooting it raw and you can go ahead and change it after the fact like stills. And picture profile is currently off. You can see the ISO is blinking right now because I have the lens cap on, so it's like it's too dark, but that's where your ISO is, your plus minus for your exposure comp, your aperture is 4, we're at 1/400th of a second, and we're in standby. Standby means we're not recording. If I hit the record button, it would change and it would start counting up. We've got AF on for, the autofocus is on for people and face, which is great. We've got lock on tracking large, which is a great mode to use when you're shooting video. And it shows that we're in AFC, which is continuous. You can also see my audio levels coming through. You've got the channel 1, channel 2, and that is the back of the screen when it comes to video. Now we've switched into the still mode to show you what you're gonna see on the back of your screen or through the viewfinder, and it's basically the same thing as you saw with video. But let's start with, you've got your manual. We're up top left. We've got manual setting with a stills camera, not a video camera. Next to that, you've got card 1, card 2, how many images you can get on it. We can see that we are shooting raw uncompressed. That's what raw with the white box around it shows us. We've got the JPEG extra fine at 33 megapixels, 33 megapixels is on. The hand that is like waving at you and says on, that is your image stabilization. Again, we've got battery is now at 34%, our meter, auto white balance, the DRO auto, same things as we saw before, same exact things on the bottom for your exposure. On the left, we still have AF on. We can see that it says mechanical shutter is selected. If I change that, it would show me that the electronic shutter was on. We've got your lock-on tracking as well right there. And now we are in AFS mode on the back. If I want to make that change, I can go here, hitting the function menu, bring up AFS, scroll down, and go to AFC. We're never really gonna be in AFS at this point, but it's all reflected on the back of the screen. It's really simple, guys. There are so many different options on this camera for changing and customizing buttons. My goal here was to show you where to make all those changes, and then you need to go through and see what works for you, because what may work for me or what may work for Steven, it's all different. Steven likes to set it up for video a specific way. I don't really jump into video very often, and I primarily focus on stills, so I set it up how I want it to be set up. Oh yeah, the other thing I didn't mention is that line right there running down. We talked about that earlier. That is where you see your buffer filling and getting, basically unfilling. H+ shows that we're in the highest plus mode when it comes to how many frames per second we're gonna shoot. H+ is the highest option for that, and that's it. That takes us to the end of the screen, showing you what's on there for stills. Woo! I know it's a long video. We just know that these are very helpful to help you set up the camera the first time. You still have your user manual that you could download online, or you could read if it was in the box. I'm not even sure if they include it in the box anymore, but it's somewhere. If you want to go in deeper, you could do that. Sometimes the manual is confusing, but the whole point of this, once again, was to give you a great starting point to help you set up the camera right out of the box, help you explain how to put the lens on, how to turn it on, proper battery maintenance, how to take care of it. Your memory cards, one thing I didn't mention is that you can transfer the data from the camera directly to a computer, but I do recommend getting a card reader. It's going to be quicker, and you don't have to have the camera sitting on your desk while you are transferring the files via the memory card and a card reader. So I hope you enjoyed this. Please give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below with that you got this far. Say hashtag I got this far. Don't forget to subscribe to check out all the videos when they come live. There even is the bell to get notified when new videos are available. And don't forget to sign up for the email list over on the website, because I will send you a free guide to capturing motion in low light situations. Just look for that orange box, put your name in it, hit send it, and I'm gonna send you that guide for free. It's gonna be very helpful, especially when you're starting out. Steven, thank you for doing this video with me. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you very much. Jared, Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.